Let's see if this is working. Oh yeah, gotta kill my audio though. Let's see if this is working. Excellent. I'm gonna pop out the chat and we can get going. Hope you're doing well today. Today is gonna be kind of a quickie, hopefully, talking about kind of creating your project from scratch. There's some tools and things in place that I'll be sharing with you today, and we'll just jump into it. And if you haven't already, make sure you do this. Appreciate all the comments that come in, the suggestions. Like, I always usually get a couple suggestions per week. It's like, how am I supposed to do all this? But this particular week is another request from someone in the community who was like, how the heck do I make my own project from scratch? Like, do I just copy folders? Like, how do I do this? So we'll be going over that today, but I wouldn't have done that today if it wasn't for you guys and your suggestions. So keep them coming, because that's what is really helping kind of grow the content here, and also just like sharing knowledge with you guys. That's what it's all about. So yeah, and don't forget to like and subscribe, of course. So you're starting from scratch. So you have some options in Zephyr, depending on what your goals are. If you're kind of in a place of like, all right, I just need to do some quick and dirty testing, you can do it a certain way. Or if you're trying to create the project for the long haul, say it's like something you're starting from scratch and it's going to be a kind of living project for months, if not years, you're definitely going to want to do it a different way. And then I'll just be going over the tools involved here that I've kind of created to help folks in the Zephyr community. At least you can just take a look at it and use it as an example if you don't agree with some of the things that I've done. But I hope I can share as much with you to get you started without making you want to pull your hair out. The quick and dirty, so like I mentioned, we're creating this, we're just like copying and pasting a sample essentially. So you already have a working Zephyr repo. You already, like, if you're using NCS, it's already installed. You already have it set up. And what you can do is simply take one of the samples, rename it, and then target that new directory. And I'll show you what it looks like. But the downside is that you're not able to use the West Manifest configuration. So if you have dependencies, or if you want to, when you're initializing that repository somewhere else, you're essentially going to have to set up your repository and your dependencies beforehand. So that's the biggest drawback, and that's why I don't recommend anybody doing this for production purposes. But for kind of internal testing and evaluation and things like that, it's perfect. So this is the NRF 9160 Feather examples and drivers. And I basically just created a track, like a copy. I copied so this is in the sample folder, and I'll show you that in a second. I'll just pull it out. But all you're doing is making a copy. The big thing here, and was something I just didn't rate on the slides, is that when you're making a copy, you want to make sure you delete that build folder. The build folder, basically, when your build scripts go through and create everything, it's pointing to an absolute path to that folder. So when you go to build again, it's going to be like, I can't find the file that I'm looking for. Or it'll go to the other directories and use the source code from the other directories, which is not what you want. So always delete that build folder. It's just whenever you're moving things. And if you're having problems when you're when you're building, or you're like, what the heck is going on? Deleting that build folder is always a good default kind of debug task to make sure you didn't screw anything up in that department. So for the VS Code plugin, the Zephyr Tools plugin, which really anybody can use, I built it for my community to use the NRF 9160 Feather, make it a little bit easier, but anybody really can use it to build their projects. so on and so forth. And we'll get into the template as well, and that is also something that anybody can use. But for this guy, it's literally where you can issue the change repo command, and it'll just change a couple things on the back end, and then you can actually execute your builds. In reality, if you're just using the CLI tools, you're going to be using West. You're just literally changing CD to the new repository, whatever you've named it. I just didn't rename it here, just tracker copy, and then just do a West build or whatever you need to. So anybody who's more experienced, especially with the CLI commands, you should know what to do. You should be able to just create a copy and then go in there and do West build, and then West Flash if you're using Flash, or if you're using Newt or MCU Manager, you're going to be using New Manager or MCU Manager or MCU Boot. Are using those two to talk to MCU Boot to update your device. So hopefully that makes sense. But the big thing here, and we're going to jump into this, is we're the long-term approach is probably my best recommendation for anybody who's wanting to start something from scratch, where that repository is going to be living. You're going to be using it for across different machines, different developers. So we're going to start with a template, and that allows you to, in part of that template, by default, you're organizing dependencies using a West manifest, and we've talked about the West manifest previous episodes of the kind of Zephyr 101 here, and you can kind of jump over to those if you'd like to check it out a little bit more. We're not going to be editing the manifest, we're just going to be using it whatever's by default. And we're going to be using tools like the Zephyr Tools VS Code plugin, which is available. All you have to do is just search for Zephyr Tools in VS Code itself to install it. And the only downside is that Zephyr is a little complex. I'll just say that. But it creates a bunch of files and folders and things that without playing around with it, you might not know what they do, and you might not know if you delete something or change something, you don't know how it's going to affect everything. And that's part of learning. So I've already covered a lot of it. CMake lists, kconfigs, the manifest files. Those are the three main things you got to kind of know, and they've been covered in past kind of live sessions. So definitely go check those out. So what you can use is this is the template. If you go to github.com/circuitdojo/Zephyr-template, and this is an Apache 2 licensed template that you can use out of the box. You can download it. You can start using it immediately. I, by default, set it up to use the NRF 9160 Feather, but you can add your own board definitions, add your own overlays. It's just there as an example. Makes it a little bit easier for anybody who has the NRF 9160 Feather to start playing with it and creating something from scratch, which is great. But literally, all you have to do is go over to the right side and hit fork. This will fork the template in your own in your own user space, and then what we'll be doing is we'll be downloading that template and initializing it using the VS Code plugin. So, and also before I go to the next slide, the link for this template is in the description box below. So it's right there right now. So you should be able to go to it and start playing with it as I'm going, if you have questions as we go. So for the VS Code plugin, for Mac, it is Command-Shift-P to get this menu. Many of you know this, but just for those who don't. And on PC and Linux, it's going to be Control-Shift-P. All you're doing is just typing in Zephyr Tools init repo. And this allows you to kind of connect or download that new fork, and it'll initialize it, download all the dependencies, and even your tool chain. You don't really have to worry about anything, which is nice. And for anybody who has installed Zephyr and all the dependencies, you know how painful it is. So I created it to make it easier for people. And so far, so good. I use it all the time now. I don't bother doing anything with the command line. I just don't, because it's already done. You don't have to worry about it. And so for this, you're selecting a folder. In this case, the folders are already initialized, but let's pretend it's empty. I'm going to be putting all the contents of everything into this Zephyr dash template folder. And just selecting OK, and then it'll do all the work on the back end to download all the dependencies and all the code from the West manifest, turn on or install any Python dependencies and things like that. Finally, if you want to build, you could always use the command line tools, West build, and in the Zephyr tools, it gives you a whole bunch of options here, but you can do the build option or the build pristine. Pristine is it cleans the repository before building. If you do, you know how I mentioned earlier, how if you have that build folder and you move it, or you move a whole repository somewhere else, and you have to delete that build folder, this pristine command will not fix all problems. So you do still have to delete a build folder if you do kind of relocate something. So that's something to bear in mind. But for the most part, it's just like starting a build from scratch. It won't use any of the cached information. It'll take the whole build time. It'll take a lot longer than if you just did a regular build, which will depend on dependencies. And if nothing's changed, it won't rebuild everything. So it's nice. And of course, these are the commands I was kind of referencing throughout the presentation here. Is if you want to use the manual commands, if you know how to set up your repository manually, you can always use your West Init -m. And then the repository URL. This will essentially kind of bootstrap your repository. Essentially, that's what the VS Code Zephyr Tools plugin is doing on the back end. It's just running these commands. And then you're just doing the West update command as well. And then that last one is just the West build -b and then your board name. And of course, I've gone over these commands in the past, but the VS Code Zephyr Tools plugin makes it a little bit easier to get started. So there you go. And then I will run through just to show you what it would look like. Let me see. So here I have the template here, and you can just go to fork, and you can fork it to whatever. And literally, that's it. And then, or actually, maybe I should use this template button instead. That might make a little bit more sense. So like, my new project. So correction on that, you click the use this template button rather than the fork command, because then it will, I think it'll probably just remove all the commit history and just kind of merge it down into one commit as kind of like the initial. So my new project, you can create it public or private, whatever. Doesn't really matter. And then it is creating it, and we'll see in a second if that commit history actually shows up or not. No, it just smashes everything together as an initial commit. And literally, you go over here and copy that guy, and we'll just run over to VS Code. And I'm currently in the Zephyr template folder, but we'll initialize it as in a different folder, and hopefully it's not showing. But what I'm doing is I'm selecting the folder I want to put this guy in. So I've created that, so it's gonna reopen. So I've created the folder, and I've set the folder which I want to initialize to, and it'll reopen, and then it'll prompt you to set up that URL, that new project that you just forked or created that from the template, and then we'll just pop that in there, and then it should start rocking away. So right now it's initializing the repository, it's pulling the baseline files that are there. That's kind of the scaffolding. And then it is pulling all the manifest dependencies. This takes a while, so I hope you have something to drink. In this case, I just have water today, but sometimes, tea, coffee, whatever. But this kind of gives you just a sane default to start with. I included all the version numbering and things like that I've talked about in the kind of past couple episodes of the live streams. All of that is built into this template. So if you are interested in using that, you can use it. It comes built in here. You can see that main file if you can squint and see it. I don't know, there's a way to make it bigger. Yes. Oh, too big. Excuse. You can see that config underscore app version. That is the same version string that I was kind of mentioning previously, where it's that get described tags all mushed together as a string, and you can use it in your app to see it on the command line, or you can use it as something that you're referencing for cloud backend, things like that. So, let's see any other crazy features. I also included the very basic event manager that I've used in the past. It's just based off of Zephyr message queues. You can send messages to it. You can get the messages back in a processing loop. So those are some options for you as well. Just there as a reference. If you want to use it, you can, or if you don't want to, it's fine. And then also that app version stuff, you can also use it to get the latest version as a struct. You can use that struct anywhere you want in your code. So just some basic things that you can kind of use and look at and see if you can use it in your own projects. And if you don't want to use it in template, you don't have to, but I hope this has given you an idea of kind of what you can do to get started without having to reinvent the wheel a little bit. So quick and dirty for testing and one-off stuff. And I don't recommend it for anything where you're going to be using it for long term, because setting up the dependencies and then setting up your repository is just a little messy. And also, so the solution for that is just the long term, creating from something like a template to build your own code upon. So those are kind of the two options. And then you can do it from scratch if you're experienced and you just don't want to use anything. You can or you have your own template. You can do that too. So, and let me check the chat here. So, Costas, finally basics. Yes, basics. And Amir, hey, do you work with Can on Zephyr? And I have done a little work with Can on Zephyr, just enough to be dangerous, but not enough to actually I don't do it every day. But if it's something you like to see, just let me know. Maybe I should be able to do maybe a basic tutorial on using Can and Zephyr. So that could be coming next. But that is about it for today. But if anybody else has any questions, I'll just hang around for another second. Da, da, da. And if we go back to this thing is still initializing. You can look at this. Yeah, Zephyr just takes up a lot of. It's just pulling a lot of files. It's basically doing a git. It's like a git clone for every single dependency, and sometimes it's pulling. It's not doing a shallow clone. It's actually pulling the clone of a full repo. That's why it takes so long. Fortunately, you only have to do it once, as long as you don't screw anything up once. But that's it. And I don't think I see any more comments or questions. So, question. Costas, you got me. All right. What if you have several projects? How do you avoid downloading Zephyr again and again? Good question. So I usually, right now, because I run different, for different customers and different projects, sometimes I'm not always caught up on the certain version of Zephyr I'm using. So I end up just like, it's not great, but I use different copies of Zephyr, especially if they're not in lockstep. With that said, there are ways, like Zephyr originally, like you can actually set some environment variables to actually like target a specific install of Zephyr somewhere else on your machine. That way you don't have to like reclone it every single time. So it's up to you. I haven't built that into the VS Code plugin, mostly because it just creates a lot of extra complexity. But that's something I've been thinking about a little bit more, and it would be great to have it so you only have to check it out once and only once, and that's it. Because it takes up space. It's like 1.5, 2 gigs. Not great. So sorry I don't have a better answer for you, but maybe that's something we'll go into in future live streams. And if I play around with the plugin, we might be able to do something where make it a little bit easier for people who want to keep their repo in a certain state. The biggest issue with it is because if you're using a West manifest and you're also pulling in a lot of different dependencies, it's hard to cache those, and it gets kind of crazy as you go further and away and you have different dependencies that maybe like go out this way and Zephyr goes this way. As you use Zephyr, you'll realize like it just gets kind of crazy, and that's why for simplicity's sake, for people who are just starting out, it's better just to pull all the dependencies and have them in all a consistent state. And then if they start getting more advanced and they start wanting to work on different projects but use that same Zephyr base, then they can. So it's crazy. That's all I have to say. It's awesome. Zephyr's awesome. Use it every day. But there's just some certain things. It's just like, So hope that helps. Yes, thank you. Yeah, it is huge. Thanks, Costas. Really appreciate your question. And I think that's it. I think you're done. All right. Well, of course, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me directly or check out my community.jaredwolf.com, or you can leave a comment here and I read them all and I reply to them, most of all of them. So let me know what you think. If you have suggestions for the next video, please let me know, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.